All right, we have three topics on this stuff, all revolving mukseh and tircha, not doing extra work on Shabbat. The first topic is going to be a continuation of the Mishnah, which is allowances to make room for guests and students. The second topic will be allowances of Shabbat for the sake of animal welfare. And the third topic will be allowances on Shabbat for the sake of sick. Specifically birthing mother, which is the Mishnah following. So a lot of really interesting topics, and I think there's a common theme that we'll sum up at the end. So Mishnah, as if you remember, said that you can move 4 or 5 baskets full if there's guests or students coming, and then it gives a list of specific items that are allowed. These are all edible items that you can actually eat, so therefore they're not mukseh. And then it gives the opposites of a list of items that you cannot move because although they are food, they are not available right now to eat because of their ritual status. And then it ends with mukseh, meaning items that are branches that you, chavile kash v'chavile etzim, where if you had in mind to use them for animal food, then that's fine, you can move them. But not if you had in mind as firewood, because then the mukseh. So that was the last thing in the Mishnah. We just remember Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said that these arum is allowed because ravens eat them, whereas Tanakama does not think that they're food. Okay, so that was the Mishnah, and with that in mind, let's get right back into the Talmud, starting with Ma'aseh Rishon. Okay, so this is basically Ma'aseh Rishon means the Levi, the owner gave a tenth to the Levi, and the Levi in turn took terumah. The Levi has to give terumah from the Ma'aser. It's called terumat Ma'aser to the Kohen. So if that was done, then it's edible to the Levi. And now this is kind of obvious because this is the proper procedure, and so of course this is edible food. Now, while the Peshat of the Mishnah might just be that listing things that are allowed versus things that aren't allowed. I don't know if that has to be a specific chidush in each one, just giving lots of examples. It could be that this opening one is obvious because it wants to contrast it with the one below to make the point that although it's food, because of its ritual status that's not edible, therefore the ritual status of not being edible makes it also mukseh. So it needs to make that point. That is an important point to make. But the Talmud is going to take this list and pick it apart and say each item on the list has to have some chidush. It's kind of like omni-significance. The way that the rabbis read a pasuk, they're also reading the Mishnah. Each item has to add something new. Okay, so in this case, we ask, Peshita, of course, if you took Maaser properly, then that's edible and it's not mukseh. So why do you have to tell me this case? Okay, before we get to the answer, it's a little bit complicated. So let me explain the normal procedure of taking terumah and maaser. That would be in an ideal case. Normally, you have the grain, it grows, you cut it, you thresh, you winnow, and you pile it up in the granary, and you flatten it out. That's called a keri. And then it's now prepared grain, it's finished and in for storage, and only then does the obligation kick in to give terumah and maaser. Terumah maaser has a couple of steps. Number one, the owner gives to the Kohen terumah, which is usually 2%. After that, he invites the Levi, then the Levi takes 10% of what's left over. In other words, 10% of the 98% that's left over, so 9.8%. And then the Levi, after that, takes 10% of his 10%, so it would be about 1%, but a little bit less, right? Actually 0.98%, and gives that to the Kohen. So the Kohen in the end is getting 2.98% total from it. So that's the right way, that's the normal way to do it. You wait till it's prepared in the granary, and then you take first terumah to Kohen, it's called terumah gedolah, then maaser, and then the Levi gives terumat maaser. However, if the order goes the wrong way, and the Levi might go earlier than the Kohen, and he might want to take his maaser before the terumah. That would benefit him because rather than getting 9.8%, he actually gets a full 10% if the Levi takes his 10% before the 2% that's given to a Kohen. Okay, now how much earlier is he going to go? There's two possibilities. He can go before, during the processing, while the grain is just cut or while it's being winnowed, before it's put in the granary. He can go, although there's no obligation yet to take Terumah and Maaser, he can go and take his Maaser beforehand. And in that case, if he does that, the owner still has to give Terumah on the 90% that's left, but the Levi does not have to give Terumat Maaser, right? Because he took it before the obligation kicked in. So in that case, the Kohen will end up getting a little bit less than he was going to get otherwise, and the Levi gets more. Okay, so that's the case that we're talking about. So last sericha, shikdimo bashibolim. It means that the Levi came before the Kohen while it was still in shibolim, while it was still on the stalks. Not literally on the stalk, but rather before the processing was completed. V'nitila hemenu terumat maaser, v'lo nitila hemenu teruma gedola. And the terumat maaser was taken, but not the teruma gedola. So, right, to repeat or clarify, I'm not sure if I said it correctly, the Levi has to, when he takes 10% before the Kohen comes, he has 10%, he still has to give 10% of his 10%. He does still have to do that. But what he does not have to do is he doesn't have to give the teruma gedola that the owner would have had to give on his 10%. Did you get that? So it actually only makes a tiny bit of difference between the two. Here, there's a note on the bottom here calculating it. In a normal case, the Kohen would get 2.98%. If the Levi goes first and takes it, then the Kohen will only get 2.8%. Because the Kohen does not have to give to the Levi does not have to give to the Kohen, he has to give the 1%, right? In other words, 10% of 10%, but not the 2% that the owner would have had to give if he gave it beforehand. And so that makes up this difference of 0.18%. Okay, that's the case that it's talking about. And where am I? Yeah. So Terumat Maaser was taken, but not Terumat Gedolah from the portion of the Levi. And even so, he still is allowed to eat it, right? He does not have to give that. To prove it from the pasuk, the Levi no longer has to give that original Teruma Gedolah, the 2% on what he took. In other words, Levi has to give a tenth, but he does not have to give a tenth and the 2% and the teruma. Only that's what we learn from this pasuk. Okay. Amar le papa labaye yachi avilu timo bakeri nami lipater. Hold on. What if the Levi comes not at the stage that is pre-processed, but after it's already on the grain pile, and after it's already now chayav in teruma gedolah? So since you just learned from pasuk that the Levi only has to give one of the two obligations and not both, so even if he comes later after it's processed, why not still say the same thing, that he has to give the 10% of what he received plus 2% of what he received, because the teruma gedolah was not given yet. Amar le, Abaye responds, Alecha amar keda mikol matenotechem tarimu. A few pisukim later, it says all the things that you have to give, and so this comes to include that if the processing was finished and it was piled up and stored, then the Levi does have to give the teruma gedolah as well. Now we ask, Maraita. Now, why'd you say that this one is excluded and this one is included? Maybe switch it around and say, if the Levi took the teruma, took his maaser early, pre-processed, then he does have to give the teruma gedolah, and if you give it later, then he doesn't, because you can learn to take the pisukim and put them opposite. The pisukim don't say which case they're talking about. So we answer, Hai idgan, Hai la idgan. This one is already dagan. It becomes grain once it's stored, and so therefore it is obligated, where the other one is not yet grain when it's not fully processed yet. Okay, so that was a complicated one. Now we get to easier one. Maaser sheni. Maaser sheni is the tenth that you give on different years, where the owner brings it to Jerusalem and eats a tenth of it in Jerusalem himself. If he lives far away, then he redeems it. So the Mishnah says, Maaseh Sheni, that was redeemed, then that's edible. Well, of course, B'shita, if you redeemed it, now the food is edible. L'asricha shenatan et hakeren velo natan et hachomesh. Hakamashmalan de'en chomesh me'akev. Actually, when you redeem it, you have to give an added fifth. Actually means a quarter of the amount there, a fifth of the total, right? So you have to add a penalty when you redeem it. So let's say he redeemed the exact value, but did not redeem and not add a fifth. You might have thought that if he didn't pay the fifth, then it's not yet redeemed, and so it's not edible yet. This teaches that although he does owe that fifth, doesn't hold back the redemption, and therefore the food is allowed. He just still does owe that money, and that's why we might not have known that. That's why the Mishnah includes it. Okay, and then finally, the things that are that you're allowed to move is hatumos hayabesh. You can move dry lupins. Davka yabesh avalach lo. Only dry but not wet. Why not? Because when it's moist, it's very bitter, and even an animal will not eat it, and so therefore it's only edible when it's dry. Okay, now we get to the list of things that you may not move on Shabbat, even if guests are coming, because they are mukseh. Avalo et tebel. Tebel is food which the Tiruman Maaser was not taken. So Peshita, of course it's mukseh, it's not edible. La siricha betebel tavu. It's talking about a case of where the tebel does not have to be taken midoraita, only in the midrabanan. What kind of case is that? Where it grows in a pot without any hole in it on the bottom. So when it grows in a pot, it's not really attached to the ground. Midoraita, you do not have to give to the man maseh. But the rabbis say you do, even though the obligation is only drabanan. Still, and practically, it's not edible, and therefore it's mukseh. That's very interesting that even the Rabbanan can change the status in terms of mukseh. And if you did not, you did not take the turumah. In other words, if the Levi took his tenth but didn't give the tenth of the tenth to the Kohen, then he can't eat it. He can't move it. Peshita, he can't eat it. This goes back to the opposite of what we just said. This is where the Kohen is coming to teach you a new case that they wouldn't have known. This is where the Levi comes and takes his tenth before the Kohen comes, but it's already processed. So it was obligated in Turumah. And then he gave a tenth of a tenth, but the Levi did not give the Turumah Gedolah, that 2%, on the portion that he gave that the owner did not get a chance to give yet. So I might have thought that it's still okay. Papa was arguing that it should be okay. Rabbi answered him and said, no, it's not okay, because he brought the other pasuk. And so when the Levi takes it before the Kohen, post-processing, then he is obligated to give the Tirumah Gedolah, otherwise he cannot eat it. Good. If you have Maaser Sheni that was not redeemed, well, it's not redeemed, he has to eat it in Jerusalem. It's not edible for him now, so it's mukseh. Peshita, isn't that obvious? Yes, it was redeemed, but not properly. For example, Maaser Shepeda al Gabe Asimon. So when you redeem, Maaser Sheni has to be with a coin that you take to Jerusalem, and not with an asimon like this. Asimon, we know, if you remember from Israel, asimon you put in the phone booth, right, with the hole in it, make necklaces out of it. Asimon literally means a coin with an unstamped coin. So if you redeem it for an unstamped coin, that's not the right way. That's not the way the Torah thinks. You might have thought it's okay, and so this Mishnah comes to add this case to teach you that that is not okay. Again, I don't think these things are the Peshat of the Mishnah, right, because you're reading a lot into it, but I think that the Talmud here is using this list as an opportunity to teach us further details about laws. And Hekdesh also, if I promise something, I said this food, I'm making Hekdesh, so I can't eat it, it's mukseh. Isn't that obvious if I didn't redeem it? In order to redeem food that I sanctified, that I made that I donated, I have to redeem it with money and not with land. If I did it with land, no good, still not edible. Velo et haluf, and they can't move arum on Shabbat. It's not edible food. Tanura banan. So based on that, now we're quoting a Tosefta that mentions other items that are food or not food. So you are allowed to move squill because deer eat it. Mustard seed, raw mustard, doves eat it. So it's okay. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel met up until Tidin Shibre Zechuchit. You can even move glass shards because ostriches eat them. That's pretty interesting. I think there are animals that eat, or birds that eat sand because it helps them digest. So maybe, and I mean, it doesn't mean big pieces of glass, but maybe ground up kind of glass that they had in those days. Ostrich, I guess, might eat them and helps them process their food. So even that's okay. Amar le Rabbi Natan. According to that, if you go by, and anything that can be eaten by any animal, then even grapevines should be okay to move on Shabbat because an elephant could eat it. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Na'amiyot shechiche pelin la shechiche. Rashbag says, no, I don't go that far. The ostriches there are around in Israel, but elephants, we don't find any elephants. So therefore, although elephants exist in the world, they don't exist around here. So for all intents and purposes, they're not here. So something that is food only for an elephant would be mukseh. Okay, that's the end of the Tosefta. Now the Moraim elaborate more. You're only allowed to move the glass shards if you actually have an ostrich on your farm, and it might eat it. If you don't own one, then it's mukseh. Amar Rav Asher Amar Ela Deka Amar Rabbi Natan Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Chavilei Zemorot Yitatu Bnei Shumachal Pilin Either Pilin Amai La. Wait, according to that you have to own one, then the question that Rabbi Natan asked, that you should allow it if there are, because elephants can eat it, did he mean that you have to own elephants in order for it to be allowed? Right, so if you own elephants, then it is allowed. No one thought that. So they didn't mean that you actually have to own it. Rav Asher says, Ra'ui, Achaname Ra'ui. If it's suitable to be edible by ostriches, even if you don't own one, it doesn't matter. As long as they're around, they're for sale, they're available. So someone nearby can use it. You don't have to own it yourself. Whereas elephants are not around, you couldn't buy them even if you wanted to anywhere nearby, and so therefore that is mukseh. You don't have to own it yourself. Amar Abaye, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi Akiva. All these four sages, Abaye says, have one thing in common. They all follow the principle that we treat all Israel as if they are princes. We don't make class differences between people, and this has an effect in various halachot. We actually saw some of them already. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel had Amaran. Rashbag, he said in the Mishnah that you can move arum because ravens eat it. Now, only rich people are going to own ravens, and yet it's not mukseh for anyone. And similarly, only rich people will own ostriches, and yet it doesn't matter, even if you don't. So this follows forth from what Rav Asher said. Even if you don't own one, it's still not mukseh. In other words, everybody's treated as if they are of a class that they could own it. So that's the way Rashbag treats everyone equally. The Bishimon, we know this one. Itnan, b'nei melachim sachin al gabe makotehen shemen veden. Sheken darkan shel b'nei melachim lasuch b'chol. The Bishimon omer kol Yisrael b'nei melachim hem. We're talking about rose oil, which is very expensive. And so the Mishnah says that princes are allowed to use rose oil on a wound on Shabbat because they use it all the time. Even if they don't have a wound, they are rich enough that they can afford rose oil just to put on their skin. And so if they use it for medicinal purposes on Shabbat, it's not apparent because they use it also for non-medicinal purposes. But according to Tanakama, a regular person who's not a prince, this would be very expensive. A regular person would only use rose oil if for medicinal purposes. Otherwise, he wouldn't spend the money on it. And so therefore, a regular person cannot use it on Shabbat because for him, it's only medicine. That's Tanakama. The Bishimon says, all of Israel are considered B'nai Melachim, and therefore, anyone, since princes can use rose oil, all Jews can use rose oil. So we see he says that. And lastly, the Bishi Ishmael and the Akiva.
So this Mishnah, we learned it earlier in the Masechet. Why wasn't this Gemara over there? Why is it over here? The second time this concept.
Oh, okay, good, right. Yeah, it could have brought it before. Maybe it wants to wait till here because now we know the Banshim Rashbag also. I mean, if it brought it earlier, then we would have had to, know something that's coming up later. So waited till the second time. So now we already have this one, right?
I mean,
but you're
Gemara
right.
always references ahead. It's like not unusual.
Not unusual to have it ahead. It's not unusual to have repeated many times everywhere it appears. So that's a great question. It's hard to know why some things are repeated many times and why some things are only here or only there. It's a good question. I also noticed that in general, the earlier Pidakim are longer than the later Pidakim, right? As if they study those more in the study sessions, and because it's the beginning, and then by the time they get to them, they gotta rush to catch up and finish. So according to that it should be earlier, but not necessarily later. Okay, but maybe now this is when the pattern is more noticeable, so it's here. Okay, that's a good question to track. Okay, we have in a baraita the Tanya Harish Shayu Noshin Bo Elif Maneh Belabush Itztela Bat Me'am Maneh Mafshitin Oto Malbishin Oto Itztela Hara'ui Lo. There's a halacha that if someone owes you money, you can take their possessions in order to pay back the loan, but you can't take their clothing, right? You can't take their millstone. Basic things that they need, you cannot take. And so, if someone owes 1,000 maneh, that's a huge amount. A maneh is 100 dinar. 4 dinar is a daily wage. So this is 25 daily wages of a day worker. And so there's 1,000 of those, right? So a huge amount, and he owes 1,000, and he's wearing a cloak worth 100 maneh, right? So a tenth of the total amount. So we take his cloak and we put it towards paying back the loan, and we give him another cloak that is fitting for him, not just size small, size medium, but it's fitting for his honor. If he's an aristocrat, we give him, a nice leather one. If he's a poor person, we give him a half-torn cloth one. Tana mishum Rabbi Ishmael, Tana mishum Rabbi Akiva, Kol Yisrael that was Tanakama, but both Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, they agree that all Israel is considered high class, and therefore you have to give them all a nice coat. They don't have to have that one that's worth 100 maneh. That's the nicest fur, diamonds and everything. But this one is a nice coat that is fitting for a prince. We give that to anyone, even a poor person. So this is not as important like bankruptcy law, and someone has to sell everything. They're allowed to keep a minimum amount. You give a minimum amount based on what they had before, based on their status, based on what, or we have, a set amount. That the set amount should be a higher level, that is to live with dignity, even though they have to give everything else away to pay back the loan. Okay, so chabile kash vechabile. So different, right, bundles of straw and wood, etzim, that depends on if you had in mind or not. Now we have a baraita Tosefta, actually, that elaborates on it. Tanur banan, chabile kash, chabile etzim, chabile zeradim. Imit kinan macha behema metaltelin otan. Behem lav and metaltelin otan. Got in mind that they're going to be food for animals, then you can move them. Otherwise, for firewood, no, you can't. רבן שמעון בן גמליאל אומר, חבילים ניטלים ביד אחד, מותר לטלטלן. בשתי ידיים אסור לטלטלן. There's different criteria. If you can move it with one hand, there's not a lot of tircha. But if you need two hands to move it, then there's too much tircha. It sounds like he's being machmir here, that even if it's animal food, it has to be a small bundle. You can't take this big giant bundle of animal food, not appropriate for Shabbat. Okay, although he's mekel in other cases here, this one looks like he's being machmir. חבילי שאה, אזוב וקורנית, הכניסן לשים, אין מסתפק בהן בשבת. So savory, hyssop, thyme. If you're using for firewood, you can't use it on Shabbat. You can't move it on Shabbat. You can't take from it. You can't change your mind. If you had in mind that they would be animal food, then you can use them yourself, and you can put them on your food also, right? it doesn't matter that you don't think that you're going to eat it. Since you thought your animal's going to eat it, it's not mukseh, and then you can take it also. So that's a good principle to know. Now, the way you take it off, it's not attached to the ground, obviously, so you're not removing from the ground, but you still have to eat it in a different way. You can't prepare it in a normal way. Kotem bayad ve'ochel. You can take off the leaves, one by one with your hand, but not with a utensil. And let's say, it's like a legume or you're trying to get out of the skin, so you can rub it and take out the seed, as long as you don't do it a lot at a time. That's what the Yehuda says. He's more mekel. Hachamim are even more machmir. The way during the week you take a lot of them in your hands and rub them around, and that would take the peels off. But on Shabbat you can only do a few at a time. Also with these other items, what are these other items? My amita, ninya, in other words, na'ana, mint leaves, siyah, setre. This is savory. Ezob abarta, hisab. Koranit shema. It has no other name. Koranita, that's what it's called. Hold on, there was a guy who was selling Koranita, and it was actually time. Oh, you're right. So now we'll add that in. That's the same. And Koranita, hashe, that's time. Itimad. Okay, that's since we talked about some different items that are food items that are available to edible or not edible, we're going to add some more things that are not grown as grain, but rather meat and fish. So basar maliach mutal taltilo b'Shabbat. Salted meat, obviously it's edible, so you can have it. Sounds like even if it's not cooked, but I guess you could eat it raw. Basar tafel, unsalted meat. Ravuna amar mutal taltilo. Avchista amar asul taltilo. It's unsalted. We have a machloket. Let's see what that's about. Ravuna amar mutal taltilo. Amar Ravuna tamid derav. Ravuna tamid derav haba. Verav k'Rabbi Yehuda simir aleh. Itle mukseh. So Rav Huna follows Rav, and Rav follows Rabbi Yehuda, who have mukseh. And unsalted meat is not edible, so it should be mukseh, and it should not be allowed to be moved. How come Rav Huna said it's allowed? Actually, although Rav does hold like Rabbi Yehuda, b'mukseh la'achila savar lo k'Rabbi Yehuda, but b'mukseh l'tatel savar la k'Rabbi Shimon. In terms of eating it, that would be a higher level. You can't eat it, but just to move it, that he follows Rabbi Shimon. So there are certain items that are mukseh, but you can still move them, but not eat them. And so this is, in terms of food, Rav falls into that, and that's what Rav Huna says. You can move that, but not eat it. Rav Chisda, on the other hand, says, Asula taltilo, you can't move unsalted meat. Rav Yitzchak bar Amei, ikla lebe Rav Chisda, Chazahu bar Avaza, da'avu kam taltilu le, mishemasha letula. Amar Rav Chisda, hasronkis ka hazinacha. Now, Rav Chisda said you can't move unsalted meat, but one time some rabbis went to his house and there was a duck. There was a duck there, unsalted, and he said, "Move it from the sun to the shade." This is because otherwise it's going to get ruined in the sun. So there you go. Rav Chisda did move duck. How come he moved duck when he said unsalted meat you're not allowed to move? A duck is different because duck you could eat raw, whereas meat would not be edible raw. We should clarify some of the laws of salting and meat in terms of kashrut. That technically, where blood is not allowed, you're not allowed to consume blood, but that only applies to blood that comes out of the meat. If the blood was within the meat, then it's okay. So if you just have raw meat, let's say you eat raw meat, like the kibeneye, right? So that doesn't have to be salted because it's raw. Or if you're roasting meat, you roast it on a fire, on a barbecue, so any blood that comes out drips down. So that would be allowed. So technically you don't have to have salted meat if you're barbecuing. You only have to salt it if you're cooking it in a pot. And there, the blood that comes out is then getting cooked back into it, and that is prohibited. And so what he means here, that duck it can be eaten even if it's raw, and even if it's unsalted, right? That's what he's talking about. Okay. Tanura banan dag maliach mutal taltilo. Salted fish you can move, but not unsalted. Again, fish does not have to be salted in terms of blood. It's not edible when it's not salted. Basar ben tafel ben maliach mutal tartelo. But meat, whether salted or unsalted, you can carry it. And we have the printed edition say ustamak bishimon. Bishimon is mekel. He must be the opinion here because this unsalted meat you're allowed to move it. But it's in parentheses because some later commentaries say wait, but there is some mukseh here. So this is a difficult baraita to figure out who it follows. But it seems to think that perhaps that even unsalted meat is edible, and therefore it's not mukseh. Bones are good for dog food, so you can move them. Spoiled meat can be eaten by a wild animal, so it's not mukseh. Water that was exposed and there might be venom in it, but a cat can eat it. Cat can eat snakes, so obviously it's okay. It can handle the venom, so that's not mukseh either. Hold on, water that's exposed, you're not allowed to have it around because someone might come to drink it. You got to get rid of it, and so therefore, actually, it would be mukseh because you can't even have it around. No one can drink it. You have to totally separate from it. That's the conclusion of discussion of the first Mishnah. Okay.
Wouldn't you have to move it because of the sakana?
Like, why would it be? It's kind of paradoxical because it's sakana, but now you don't have it in mind. You didn't have it in mind for it to be usable. So you should have gotten rid of it. But now that you didn't get rid of it before Shabbat, you can't move it because it's mukseh. Okay, yeah, I think you're right. If there really is a danger, there's little kids around, whatever, and someone might drink it, then sakana de bashot will trump, right? Obviously, but it still is technically mukseh. It's just you would have to throw it out for if there are people around that might have it. Okay, that's a good point. All right, so now we get to animal rights. So some chicks go into a pit and they can't get out. And you're not allowed to move them because the chicks are mukseh. You didn't have in mind to do anything with them. So what you do is you take some baskets, some dishes, and you put them upside down, and you make a little staircase, and then chicks can hop up and get out on their own. Or a hen that some escaped out of the pen, so you can push it along until it gets back in. Now again, you're not doing this only because you don't want to lose your hen, that's true too, but also because it's dangerous for the hen. If it goes out there, it's going to get lost. Animal's going to come eat it. So it's also for the animal's welfare that it be helped out. You can't lift it and bring it back, but you can shove it back in. Medadedin agalin usyachin. Calves, foals, you can help them to walk. If they need to get to the right spot, they're going the wrong way, you can guide them and help them out, but not lift them. Isha medada et benah. And so too, a mother can help her son walk. So in other words, even if the son is like, just 1.5 or something and learning how to walk, you can take a few steps, but needs to hold on. So you can hold on to the kid's arms as long as the kid can walk somewhat. You can't, swing him, but that would be okay. Of course, now children are not mukseh. So this is not talking about only mukseh, but also about carrying. This would be in the Shut Rabim, right? So it's actually important halacha, even in the Shut Rabim, as long as the kid can walk somewhat, you can hold his hands and help him out. As long as the kid knows how to put one foot in front of the other, and there's always one foot on the ground. But if you're just dragging him along, then that would be called carrying. Okay, that's the Mishnah. So another application similar to the chicks, an animal that fell into an aqueduct, right? It might be deep and it can't get out, so you can't pull it out again because mukseh, it's also tirha, but you can bring cushions and blankets and it will come out by itself. Sometimes people translate amatamayim as a stream, and that would be kind of strange because then the pillows would get all wet and mushy. I don't know how that would work, but it's actually aqueduct, and aqueduct doesn't always have water in it, only when it rains. So I'm imagining it's probably when it's dry, but it's still deep and can't get out. Hold on, is that really allowed? We have an opposite Tosefta. Behema shenafla matamayim osela parnasa bimkoma bishbir shelo tamut. As this animal falls in, you give it parnasa, you give it a check, you give it food, right? And where it is till Shabbat. So you take care of it so it won't die. And after Shabbat, then you take it out. Who says you can? So this doesn't say you can put pillows in it. Parnasain karim uchsatot la. So what do we do with this contradiction? La kashya. If you can keep it alive in place, then that's what you should do. That's what the second baraita is about. And the first one is when it's impossible. You can't get the food there. It needs attention, and so you got to get it out. So if you need to, then you get it out with the pillows. We have another problem with using the pillows. Once you put the pillows there, and now the animal standing on it, now it becomes mukseh. And so this is kind of like dismantling. It's like soter, because you're taking something that was usable and now making it not usable. So isn't that a problem? You're right. Normally, you can't take something that is usable and make it not usable, but that problem is only derabanan, whereas an animal suffering is deoraita. And so, therefore, this deoraita of animal suffering, preventing animal from suffering, is more important, and therefore we do that, and even though it violates a derabanan. So I think here in this one paragraph, you see the kind of core value that underlies all of this, that although we, all these laws of Shabbat are very serious, very important, and yet we find leniencies and loopholes in order to alleviate suffering of animals. Okay, the next example is Tangot Shel Barcha, the hen that fled, Dochin in Medadin La. So it says you can push it, but it doesn't say that you can walk it, right, as it does with the other animals. So Tanena Leha, the Tanuna Banan, Medadin Behema V'Chev Bechaser, Avalo Eta Tarnegolet. And we have a Braita also says this, that you can help animals and wild animals and birds walk in the chaser, but not the hen. So why is it different? Tanegot Matamala, right? Why can I go and help its little feet walk? Because the way I would help it would be to hold its wings, and then I would walk it along. But the instinct of the hen is when its wings are being held, it picks up its feet. And then picking up its feet, then you're carrying it. So there's no way to help it walk. The only way is to push it, which is not as good, but that's the only way to do it with a hen, without carrying it. Okay, we have a couple of baraitot. You can do all this in a private domain, because it is somewhat then carrying. But a mother can help her child to walk, even in Shutarabim. I guess the child has more da'at than an animal, and animal you really got to kind of, put it between your legs and push it along. It takes a lot more effort than a child just holding its hands. And certainly a mother can do it in the private domain. That's one baraita. Another baraita says, "En okrin behema b'chebaof bechaser, avad dochin behen sheyikansu." You can't carry the animal. Now, this is not because of carrying, because of chaser, but rather because of mukseh. But you can push it until it goes in. So now we have inner contradiction within the second baraita. Hagufa kashya. Amart enokrin, about dadoye medadin. Hadar amart dochin in medadin la. In other words, within this baraita, the first half says you can't carry it. So, okay, can't carry it, but it sounds like anything else would be allowed, right? Including walking it. But then it says you can push it. Well, you can push it. That makes it sound like that's the only thing you can do, but you can't help it walk. So, which is it? Where is walking helping it walk? Does that fit into the first category or second category? Actually, walking it is allowed, and the reason you have to push it in the end is specifically because for a hen you can't help it walk; you must push it. But for every other type of animal and bird, you are indeed allowed to help it walk. And finally, Amar Abaye, Hayman de Shachet Tanegolet. So practical advice in case you're killing a hen. You should, if you're doing shechita on the hand, you should take its legs and stick them all the way into the ground, or take it off the ground in the air totally, which is I think the way they usually do it now. If it's near the ground and not stuck in, then it'll put its claws in the ground and it'll convulse, and then its signs, its esophagus, and what's the other one called? Right?
Trachea.
Trachea, right. Will get dislodged, and you have to cut them properly, and they won't be in the right place, and then the shechita will not be good. And so that's just some good advice about another thing about hens and their feet. Okay, now finally the last mishnah for today. Okay, you can't make an animal give birth on Yom Tov. Not when it means that this, it means usually the farmer would go and actually pull the fetus out of the animal. You can't do that on Yom Tov. You have to let the animal give birth by itself. Aval misa'adim. You can help it along. You just can't actually pull out the fetus. Umiyaladin et haisha b'Shabbat ve'korin lachachamam makom l'makom achalin ta'alet Shabbat. However, for a human being, for a mother, you can help and pull the baby out, and you can call a midwife, and she can come from a different city, even though it violates Techum. You can violate Shabbat because this is sakanat nefashot. You can violate Shabbat to help a woman give birth. You can also tie the umbilical cord. You can even cut the umbilical cord. According to Nakama, you have to leave it there. You can tie it, but you have to leave it attached until after Shabbat. Not on the same day, 8 days later. Anything to do with Brit Milah, you're allowed to do on Shabbat. Okay. Kesed Mesadin. What does it mean that you can help out the animal to help it give birth, but you can't pull the animal out? It means you can catch it so it won't fall onto the ground. That's how you help out. Now, furthermore, you can push the flesh in while it's coming out of the womb, so that will help it. So you can't pull it out, but you can push around, so that will make it easier to come out. So we have a baraita that supports Rav Yehuda, who's more mahmir. He says you can only catch it. So it also says you couldn't catch it, but this baraita does add that you can also breathe into the animal's nose to get it to start breathing, to get it started, and you can bring it to and put it to its mother's teat to help it to suckle. I guess it's usually instinctive, but in case it's not, you can help it along. And while we talk about that, some other things that you can do to help animals along. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, on Yom Tov, you can do various things to help the mother care for its young. Usually it does, but sometimes a mother will just ignore the baby, ignore its young. So what do? You pour salt in the wound. You put a bowl of salt into her womb, and that causes pain, but that pain will cause her to remember that she just gave birth and have mercy. You have a play on words of rechem and rachamim. It's not a play on words, it's the chorus, the root of the word rachamim, of mercy, of caring, is from a womb. And so that emphasis, reminder of her womb, will help her to feel mercy and take care of the child. You take the water of the afterbirth, you put it on the baby so that it will smell it and say, oh, that's my baby, and it will take care of it. That only works for kosher animals, but does not work for non-kosher animals. Why not? Non-kosher animals, they don't distance themselves from their children, and if they do, then these tricks won't help. So they only need it, and they only help for kosher animals. Okay, a little bit more. and we do. That's for an animal. We don't pull out the baby. For humans, we do everything. So where the Mishnah said that you can help pull the baby out and you can call a midwife. So we know those things. Shabbat, that's a more general category. What is that coming to include? What other specific things would I be allowed to do? Even things that are more incidental. If she wants to, let's say it's nighttime, and she wants there to be light in the room, she feels more comfortable. If there's light, she feels like they'll do a better job in taking care of her. Then they can go and light a candle even on Shabbat. And the friends can, if she wants oil to anoint, to rub, to make her feel better, then they can bring oil in a hand. If the showing is a little, they can carry it in her hand. That's not the normal way to carry it. So therefore, that would only be derabanan. If she needs more than just a cupful of oil, then her friend can dip her hair in oil and then carry it over that way, and then wring out her hair, and then she'll have more oil. If she needs even more than that in order to feel comfortable, then you can bring a whole vessel full, which would be, deoraita. But if it's needed, you can even do that. Amar mor, now you just said in this baraita that you're allowed to, if she needs, she can light a candle. Of course you can. You said you could do everything. I was talking about when the mother giving birth is blind, so she doesn't benefit from the light directly. I might have thought she can't see. I can't make light a fire for her. No, and puts her mind at ease. She knows I can't see, but my friends and the midwife, if they have light, then they can see, and they'll be able to take care of me better. So even if it's only psychological to help her mind be at ease, and the friends don't really need it themselves, it's still allowed. In other words, we go to any extent, even a small thing. If it helps her at all, then we do it. Okay, last point here. Hold on. You said if she needs a little bit more than a handful of oil, she can put it in her hair. Okay, but she puts it in her hair, she's going to bring it in her hair. Then you're ringing on Shabbat, which is a melacha d'oraita. So how does that help? You should just bring it in the vessel. One answer is no. Ringing out doesn't apply to hair. Only applies to clothing. When it means put it in the hair, it doesn't mean you actually get the hair all wet with oil. It means you take a small jug and you stick it in the hair, and that is a shinoi, a different way of carrying. Mishnah actually mentioned that example. So therefore, that is allowed. Why? Because as much as you can change, do it in a different way, and not violate Shabbat d'oraita directly, you should. Okay, that's all for today. Okay, a couple of just important points. That this is very, very interesting. That as much as you can do, you can. This is actually, very practical. If you have to violate Shabbat because of pikuach nefesh, then you violate totally, or should you try to minimize as little as possible? Happens to be today when I was walking to Bet Knesset this morning. On the way, I saw someone who says he had a medical emergency. He had to drive to the hospital. So he's about to get in his car and he's driving. And I was thinking to myself, does he need to minimize the violation? Like, if there's a red light at the end of the block, usually you'd put gas until you get to the block and then brake. Does he have to not put gas that time as he goes to the end, right? Should he not put on the air conditioning because you can drive but not the air conditioning? What about when you get there? You have to leave the car running? Do you turn it off, right? For these things, I think most of the time we say, once you're doing it, you're doing it. If you have to write something on Shabbat because we call it nefesh, you don't go ahead and have to look for a pencil. You just write it as is. And Rambam seems to say that once there's pikuach nefesh, then do things normally. But there is an opinion here that as much as you can to minimize, you do minimize. And the last point is that I think that, although there's a lot of technicalities of the halacha here, there's an underlying message, which is that I think the Mishnah and the Gemara here is teaching us fundamental ethics and saying, Shabbat laws are so important. How important are they? Well, even if your house is burning down, you only save a few things. And so Shabbat is more important than any material things, and you let your house burn down. Yet, when it comes to these ethical values, in terms of inviting guests over, or students over, or helping animals, or helping someone who's ill, in those cases, we go and we find ways of being lenient, and although, when your house is burning down, technically you could find some ways, say it's the banan, it's not the fire itself, and whatever, right? But I think that the fundamental values are built into these laws. And yeah, you can tell someone it's important to take care of sick, it's important to take care of animals, it's important to invite guests. You can just say it, but when it's built in to the structure of the halacha, then I think it's much more impactful, concrete, and becomes internalized in a much deeper way. Thank you for joining.